Hi guys, in this video I'm going to cover all the anti-French lines. So things like the King's Indian attack, or 2b3, or the wing gambit, all these sort of anti-lines against the French. So far we're going to start with, first we're going to start with d3, it's a King's Indian attack. Against this you play d5, knight d2, and now on the old French series I did on my other channel, I recommended playing knight f6 here, knight gf3, knight c6, and then after g3 just takes e5, bishop g2, bishop c5, castles, b6, c3, a5, and now we're going to try to play bishop a6 next move. And this is also a pretty decent way to play against the King's Indian attack. But the new line I'm going to recommend is after knight d2 is just to play c5, and I quite like this idea. As you shall see, knight gf3, knight c6, g3, and now g6. And I quite like this idea of playing g6. The reason knight f6 isn't so great here is because you play knight f6, and eventually white's going to play e5 at some point. This is in his plans. Obviously not going to play it immediately, but he's going to play it at some point, and we have to lose the tempo going back to d7. So knight f6 is not where I want to develop my knight. I want to go g6, put my bishop on g7, and put my knight on e7. Okay, so bishop g2, bishop g7. This already is a really nice square for my bishop. I'm got a really nice diagonal across this pressure against the b2 pawn, and after I go knight g7 next move, I'm going to have pretty good development. Castle, knight g7, rook e1, b6, and now it's a couple of moves that white can play here, either c3, e5, or h4. Okay, so look at c3 first. Okay, now against this you have two options. You can either play h6, is what Kasparov played, or a5 is also another good way to play. They both pretty much lead to the same position. I prefer to play h6 first, now after h4, and then you can go a5, a4, and now the reason of playing this a5 idea is now you get this really nice rook a7 move. Now the rook's really well placed on a7, it gets off this really dangerous diagonal from the bishop, where it could potentially hit the rook, and after it goes to rook a7, we're looking at protecting the e7 pawn if this e5 if it opens up, and we could also bring the rook to d7 and put a lot of pressure along the d file. So here knight b3 was played, and this game was actually Kasparov was playing here. He continued with d4 takes, pawn takes, bishop d2, e5, rook c1, and I decided the best place for the bishop was on e6. And already black has a really nice position. He has a space advantage in the French, which is very rare, and it's very welcomed as well. You know, a good old space advantage it always helps the cause. So yeah, I already really like black's position here. White's position is all his pieces aren't very active, and because of the space advantage that black has, he has much better pieces, and white's going to really sort of struggle to get his pieces to good squares. Okay, so that's c3's one move against b6. Another idea is e5 straight away, and against this we want to put a lot of pressure on this e5 pawn. So notice how we haven't lost a tempo by having our knight on f6, and by having our bishop on g7 we're already putting a lot of pressure on this e5 pawn. So we play queen c7, queen c2, queen e2, and now a really nice move for black is just to play g5 here, forcing white to swap our g pawn for their central pawn. And this is a good trade for us since we're swapping a wing pawn for a central pawn. Okay, so after knight takes g5, we're going to take on e5 our queen. We don't mind a queen swap here. Queen takes, knight takes e5, and now black's going to have a much better middle game or end game position, just because of our great central pawns here, and our pieces are going to be more active as well. I mean, if you don't want to swap off queens, you could always just play knight takes e5 here. It's really your choice. Okay, so that's why e5 not so great. h4, this is another idea from white. They just want to go h5 straight away. Try to attack your king, which is very common in King's Indian attack. They want to try to start a King's kingside attack. So we go h6 here. The idea is that they go h5, we can just bypass the pawn of g5. So queen e2 is played, now we go a5. This is a very common idea in this line I'm showing you. We want to play rook a7 and come across to maybe a d file, or just protect the knight on e file, and then just get off this really annoying pin. e5. Okay, so if white ever tries to take on d5, then always recapture the pawn. Then pretty much every single circumstance is pretty much always best to capture the pawn unless you're losing for some reason. So I just thought I'd point that out. And now we can just play rook a7 next to moving castle here, but it's not very common that white's going to try to take on d5. e5 is a very common idea, especially in a King's Indian attack. They want to play this e5 move. They want to bring their knight over to f1, to h2, to g4, and put this bishop on f4, and really start attacking on the king's side. Also, another important thing to remember is don't rush to castle when you're playing black. We don't need to castle very early on. That's hence why we've played b6 and a5 first before we try to castle, because we like to say in this position our next move is going to be g5, and if we'd castled here, then g5 would be a load of rubbish. So we don't want to commit ourselves too early, and it might be that after, say, rook a7, our king might want to come over this side to the queen's side where it's going to be safer. So just delay castling. Just wait to see what your opponent's going to do before you decide. Because yeah, g5 is a very important move in a lot of these lines, and if you castle, then it's not going to be any good. It's okay. So h takes, knight takes e5. Already, I think this is slightly better than the previous position. We had our queen on c7 and we wanted to take on e5, because now we even have the whole h file open for our rook, and we can start a kingside attack. So here we can just go something like queen c7, put our bishop out on a6, and then just castle queenside, and maybe double up the rooks on the h file and just start our kingside attack. So yeah, this g5 break's always a useful move against a King's Indian attack, and this is the line I'd recommend for you guys to play as well. Okay, so let's look at the other lines. After e6, white can play b3. The idea of just developing his bishop by fianchettoing it, put a lot of pressure on g7. So we go d5, bishop b2. It's not a good idea to take this pawn. It's not worth it. Just go knight f6 instead, forcing him to play e5, knight fd7, and now queen g4. And this is the best way for white to continue. What he was trying to do is always put a lot of pressure on this g7 pawn, but that's not going to bother us. We just go c5, f4, knight c6. Very simple development. Knight f3, and now we want to stop this f5 break ever happening. So we're going to play g6, and now queen h3 was played in this game, and yeah, I've marked it as a sort of dubious move because queen h3 just doesn't seem to make any sense whatsoever. If they go something like h4, which is another idea, then we can just go h5, and the queen's going to have to retreat anyway, probably back to h3, so maybe that was the opponent's reasoning behind this move. Okay, so after queen h3, let's go bishop g7, d4, queen e7, a3. Okay, and now we want to take on d4, and after knight bd2, f6. So this is we've played our two main breaks in the French. We go c5 to undermine the d4 pawn, and then we want to play f6 to undermine the e5 pawn. And already it looks like white's going to have to take this pawn, and after, say, just bishop takes or knight takes, whatever, we're already protecting our pawn advantage. We can castle next move, and black has the better position and a slight advantage to black here. Okay, so that's what you should do against b3. A fairly other common anti-sideline you can get, or a French sideline you can get, is knight f3, d5, and now has two moves. They can either go for a wing gambit with e5, or they can play this knight c3, which is also a fairly popular option against the French. So knight c3, we go knight f6, e5, knight d7, d4, c5, d takes c5, knight c6. This is all the main moves, all theory. Now we're attacking its e5 pawn, so they have to go bishop f4. We recapture our pawn on c5, bishop d3. And like I said before, we played our c5 move to undermine the d4 pawn, and now we want to play f6 and undermine the e5 pawn. So f6 takes. You could take with the queen here, or the knight. I think Morozevich tried queen takes f6. Either move is pretty good. So after knight takes f6, castles, knight e5, bishop d7, queen e2, queen e7. So often in this line, it's always the fight for this e5 square and who can control it. We want to play our queen to e7, so when they go rook e1, we can play rook e8 just to protect the e6 pawn. a3, just a6, so just stopping any, both sides are stopping any knight ideas coming into these squares. Bishop goes to g3, which is quite a nice, just safe move because the rook's all lined up already on this bishop. So just bishop g3. Now we want to take on e5. After bishop takes e5, bishop c6, and this is, I'd say, is about equal for black. Already we're threatening to go. Well, next we want to go knight to d7 to try to eliminate this bishop, and if they move the bishop, then we could always break with e5, and then we get a really nice position. Another option you can try here is just bishop d4. This is not such a bad move either. It's threatening to double pawns on the c file. So after bishop d4, I guess knight d1 has to be played to also protect this b2 pawn. But yeah, you can try either of those moves, are both equally as good. Okay, so another line that you can try. Well, also, instead of playing f6, another move I've played here before is bishop e7. And the idea of bishop e7 is just to go g5. So if your opponent makes a mistake, say of castles, then you can play g5 here, and after bishop g3, we can even go h5 here and try to trap the bishop. Or you can just go g4 immediately and try to win this pawn. I'll probably play h5 first, just forcing something like h3 and then getting this the h file open. And now this knight is going to have to move somewhere, and then we're going to win the pawn on e5. So after bishop e7, white cannot castle here. You have to play something like h4, and then we can just play f6 again. And you know, if you want to recapture here with the bishop, then this is a line you can try. And you're also threatening to take on c3, maybe double the pawns. So I don't know. Depends how you want your bishop, basically. Okay, so the other line we need to cover. I'm not going to cover all the lines against the French because also there's things like just queen h5 here and all sorts of stupid stuff that white can always try. But I'm just hoping, you know, if they're playing moves like that, they're just wasting their time, and you should just have at least an equal position, and you should be a strong enough player just to know what to do. Just play simple developing moves against any weird looking systems. I'm just covering all the main sort of sidelines here, which can be very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. So after knight f3 is also this e5 move, and the reason I need to cover this is because the wing gambit is a very sharp idea from white. And what he's trying to do is if you take on b4, he wants to eliminate the c5 pawn, so then he can play d4 and c3 himself and never have to worry about his d4 and c3 pawn being attacked by c5 moves. So he's happy to give up a pawn here. So what I recommend against b4 is just playing c4. This is quite a nice move, because now we're threatening bishop takes b4, and they can either play a3 or c3. Doesn't matter which one they play, we're going to play a5 next move. So after say c3, it's probably a better move, we play a5. Okay, and already white has to play b5. If he takes on a5, he's going to get himself in a lot of trouble. You know, we're going to have a semi-open a file against this pawn. And so like a3, then we just take this, and he's actually just losing a pawn. So after b5, we go knight d7. Okay, and now white can either play d3 or d4. It doesn't matter which one he tries and plays. You know, either one we're going to take on d3. So here we take with en passant. bishop takes d3, f6. So once again we're playing our central break here. We played c5 to break up these pawns, and now we want to play f6 to break up the e5 pawn. So there's a couple of moves that white can try. Queen c2 probably being the most sharpest idea. He's prepared to give up the e5 pawn, but in return he wants to h7 pawn and possible checks on g6. So here we can take on e5. This also gives us an escape route for our king. Knight takes e5, f takes d5, bishop takes h7, and now there's queen f6, and this is quite a nice way for black to play, just to get his, just to cover some of these squares around his king. And now he can play bishop c5 next move, put pressure on f2, and if they give us a check, say on g6, this is okay. We just go king d8, and we're not worried about not being able to castle. Our king sits very safely on d8, as our central pawns are covering our king, and already white's got not such a great position here. If we play bishop d7, attacking this pawn, so that's one developing move. We can go bishop c5, attacking this pawn, and knight e7, then attacking the bishop, so we can get our pieces out really quickly, gaining a lot of tempos. And if white tries to castle kingside here, then already we already had an open h-file for our rook to attack his king, and his king's also. Well, if you can't castle kingside, then you can't castle queenside either, because these pawns are all over the place. And then if he tries and stays in the middle, then that's also going to put him in problems. So white really doesn't have a great selection or great option for where to put his king in this position. So other moves that white can try is, say, bishop f4. Here we're just going to take on e5, knight takes, and now queen f6. So we're obviously attacking both these pieces. Knight takes d7, bishop takes d7, bishop g3, and now a nice way just to develop here is just going g6, castles, and knight h6. The idea of going knight f7. The reason we play knight h6, knight f7 is to stop any bishop coming to d6, because we want to play bishop g7. If we play bishop g7 here, then bishop d6 could get annoying. It's going to stop us from castling, so we're going to put our knight on f7 first and stop the bishop coming to into d6. So after knight h6, rook e1. Now they're threatening to go bishop e5, so we go knight f7. Very nice defensive move. And now, whilst white finishes developing his pieces, or maybe playing something like a4 here, try to get his knight into the game. We're just going to go bishop g7 next move and castle kingside, and we have this really nice central control. And the bishop g7 is going to sit really well, putting a lot of pressure on the c3 pawn. We even bring our rook to c8, and I actually think black's a lot better in this position. So the other move that white can try here is just queen e2. Okay, and against this, well, I sort of mark queen e2 as a sort of dubious move. It doesn't really make much sense, because after we take, knight takes, queen takes, knight f6, already we're going to gain a tempo when we develop our bishop to d6, attacking the queen. So say if white tries to castle here, we go bishop d6, queen's got to get back, then we castle kingside, and already we're going to threaten to play, well, we're ready to play e5 and then e4, get his central pawns going, get his bishop out to g4, and white's just wasted time just going queen e2 to go back again. So yeah, if you wanted to capture here on the PC, it was better to play this bishop f4 move instead. So yeah, against the wing gambit, I think the c4 move leads to very good chances for black. He does get a very nice position in all these lines, especially when he plays f6 and is completely dismantles white's centre, which is often the idea in the French defence. That's pretty much it on all these sideline moves. And they can try something like f4 as well here as white, but you're just going to play d5 and then say e5. It's just very, you just play something like this, and you're going to play f6 and just break up the e5 pawn, f6, knight h6, knight f7, and put a lot of pressure on this e5 pawn. So this isn't very important, and that's why I don't really have it on my repertoire. I only have things on my repertoire which are very, which I actually need to know. I don't need to know what to do against, say, a3 here, or queen f3 or queen wherever. It's just I only need the important moves. Queen e2 is actually a fairly common move. The reason I don't have this in my repertoire is because I already know what to do against it. It's very similar to the King's Indian attack, but this time I was going to play c5 instead. And basically by playing c5, in essence what we've done is white's gone e4, and against c5 they've gone queen e2. And queen e2 makes absolutely no sense against c5, against the Sicilian. And then we just responded with e6, which is not such a bad move. So yeah, this queen d2 move doesn't really make much sense, especially if you don't play d5, allowing them to take. So just play c5 and then just g6, bishop this way, bishop g7, knight g7, knight e7, and then knight c6. Very similar to the King's Indian attack positions. So yeah, you don't really know what to do there. It's just very similar to the d3 lines. So yeah, that's everything on any French sidelines they can try play against you. I hope this helps you, and I hope you enjoyed the French series. If you have any questions or comments on what you should do against, say they go e5 or something, then yeah, please leave a comment and I'll get back to you guys as soon as I can. Okay guys, thanks for watching, see you next time.